Hello, this is Silas, and in this video I'm going to be talking about Star Wars The Last Jedi. I watched this months ago, but didn't get around to posting this review. It's going to be going along with this illustration I did based off of, after watching the movie. It's one of the characters from this project I've been working on called Carbon, and I just created him as a Sith Lord or something. So, this review is going to be me going over things I liked about the film, kind of a step-by-step thing. It's going to be very heavy on spoilers. It's been months since the film has been out, so if you were going to go see it in the movie theater, I think it's okay to just check it out. I mean, it's probably not even in the movie theaters anymore, but I hope you've seen the movie. If not, there's going to be very many spoilers in this, so if you don't want the movie spoiled, I suggest you just watch another video. If you haven't watched it and you can watch it before watching this, I do suggest you do watch it. I found it to be a very entertaining film. It may not be Star Wars-y as people have expected it, but I thought even just as a standalone film, if you hadn't seen anything at all about Star Wars, almost if you hadn't seen anything at all about Star Wars, this film would actually be more entertaining for you. And I think that's part of what these people were doing. That's part of the intention of this new series, is to kind of bring Star Wars into a whole new generation of people, a generation of people that are aware of Star Wars as a genre, as a thing, that may have actually found out about Star Wars not directly through the main films, but through the several other licensed creations that are in the Star Wars universe. Because the Star Wars creative universe is now a very expansive thing, and somebody may have come to Star Wars through a toy or through an animation, through a comic book, through some fan fiction. So I think this is a new way that a lot of these type of films are going to be made, as the tentpole thing that brings together a lot of different threads and also sets up a lot of different things for other people to kind of build off on. So getting into the review now. So I watched the film here in Nairobi, Kenya, in a small theater. It was rather empty. I think there was maybe 6 or 7 other people in there. It was 350 shillings, which is about $3.50. And when you pay this little, normally it's like, yeah, wow, this is amazing. You're paying so little for a film compared to what you do in the United States of America in some cases. But there were some projector issues where the brightness was kind of strobing to 3 different levels of brightness periodically, and I didn't really get used to it throughout the whole film, but $350 shillings, sorry, 350 shillings, $3.50. Sometimes you get what you pay for. There was no previews even. I just got there. I was like, okay, I got there in good time, sat there, and then it went directly into the national anthem, which was kind of an interesting thing. People were wondering how long have people been playing the national anthem before sporting events. I know when I was in the United States of America, since I was in high school or middle school even. Okay, middle school we didn't have team sports, school sports, but in high school we used to play the national anthem before of the United States of America before games. But playing it before a movie theater, playing it before a movie was something different. It's not done in the United States of America. I wonder if they can actually start doing that more. See if people get to be taking a knee during that time. But it was interesting. A few people stood up. I was kind of taken. I didn't really expect it to come on, didn't stand up. But anyway, moving on. Before the release of the film, I'd only seen the trailers, I think, once when they were actually released. And then a week or so before watching the film, I watched a supercut of all the trailers together. And I found them ambiguous enough to not actually have too good of an idea of what was going on in the film. Maybe because I didn't watch them that much, I didn't pay that much attention, avoided any other online discussions about what was going to be in the film, what to be expected. So there were some surprises in the film for me that I enjoyed, and I suggest most people do this. I don't really understand why people will go on before they watch a film and read all the previews, all the expectations, read behind the scenes things. Some people want to do that, some people enjoy doing that. I prefer going in with as little knowledge as possible about what's going to go on. So Star Wars films start with a space scene, and this one did not disappoint. Had this grand space battle that set a very bold tone. The main rebel forces are led by General Leia Amidala Organa, odd name. But they're being assaulted by General Hux of the First Order. And the First Order calls in this massive dreadnought ship that bombs the rebel base from space. And this is a great intro to the ship and the technology of it and the power that it has. So after providing ample reason why this ship is called a dreadnought, they go directly into a David versus Goliath type of fight with Poe Dameron in his X-Wing, kind of, and BB, this small little R2D2 replacement robot, this little ball of a robot with this little floating head thing. They have him flying this X-Wing, trying to delay the bombardment on the planet enough from the rebel base so everybody can evacuate. So right after he does this, he goes into actually destroying the anti-ship weapons on the hull of the dreadnought. Then we have one of the first kind of talking to the audience moments that I noticed. Well, I noticed it was kind of a theme of it later on after seeing a few of them. There's a scene where the people on the bridge of the dreadnought kind of acknowledge that there's no way the X-Wing can actually destroy a dreadnought. You know, there's no exhaust chute here like in the, what's it called, on the Death Star, where the guy's just going to shoot something. Like shooting it's like shooting a wombat. Just shoot that little hole. No, none of that. So it was more just taking out all the guns, the anti-ship guns, so this next thing can happen, which is bringing in the bombers. Now, there's a lot of really cool new technology in this film that I really appreciated to see, like the tower design of the bombers with the rails of bombs, and they just kind of come out and then just drop the bombs and use the gravity to kind of shoot them towards the ship that they're trying to bomb or the target they're trying to bomb. And there's a general gripe I have about some space battles because it's a three-dimensional battlefield. So why do ships approach each other or fly in a single plane? Why do they have attack patterns that are just in a single plane? And in this case, it made sense. Since the Dreadnought is this really long flat ship, they wanted to be as close as possible to it, so they wanted to have a bombing location, so get there as fast as possible to this location they wanted to bomb and things like that. Since there's a countdown with a main gun, like trying to actually charge up and fire at the rebel ships, so I kind of get that. But then one bomber is hit, and then it sets off a series of chain reaction explosions where shrapnel and things like that from the one that's blown up goes and hits the other one and starts taking them down. And it's kind of just expected, like if you just had some different patterns. But anyway, so another thing I noticed was there are many rather explicit deaths in the opening. And I assume that hundreds of thousands of people die when you have these kind of massive ships being blown up, but now I don't recall them being as clearly shown in the Star Wars universe as they were in this film, but this could also just be a change of tone and also a recognition that many of the expected audience of this film, a lot of them have played video games where they've killed hundreds of thousands of people, ostensibly killed hundreds and thousands of people on the rebel side or on the First Order or Empire or whoever the establishment side is. So I think it's something that's a lot more common for movie audiences today. This scene was also reflected later on with the speeders, and I think reflection is another theme that goes on in this film. So inside this damaged bomber, we meet the character of Paige Tico going through this harrowing experience to finally let go of the bombs and have them drop down and take out the dreadnought. So she finally dies in this process, but it's a heroic death. And with her being being played by an Asian actress, you could say this was tokenism, but I understand there is an ability of trying to reach out to more people, but it's not a simple tokenism thing as she's actually related to a character that's brought in later on in the film. So I think they did a pretty decent job of doing that. So the rebels end up getting away, and the big bad Emperor Snoke, or is he called Emperor Snoke or just Sith Lord Snoke? Lord Snoke, the main leader of the First Order, is really not pleased. I mean, the whole film, he's not pleased. But he's assured by his underlings that they have the rebels in a string. And when they said this throughout the film until the reveal of it, I thought it would be some cliche like a tracking device in Finn. And Finn is a character that used to be in the First Order and flipped over to the rebel side. So, or some kind of Force-related thing where Snoke can kind of tell, or somebody can track Jedi energy or something. But it ended up being actually a form of new technology. And this is not something as cliche that I thought, which is another common thing in the film. As I mentioned, I was surprised by a few things, or at least like pleasantly surprised, like, oh, I didn't expect that, or oh, it's not what I expected. So is this enough to make a good film? No. Was it different than what I expected? By definition, yes. And I found that to be positive. Okay, so now back to the film and back to where we left off, because this is the scene that the last film ended with, where you have the new protagonist of Rey, and the old original protagonist of Luke Skywalker on this secluded island that Luke had kind of locked himself off at. So Luke rather unceremoniously throws away the lightsaber that Rey had handed to him. And this is where I noticed another thread of the film, which is throwing away of the past and accepting the present in order to move to a new future. It was at times far more explicit than it was in this scene. And the minor gripe that I have here is she hands him the lightsaber, and then in the next shot, she's 5 feet away. This has me wondering, did she hand it to him and then turn around and walk away and then turn back around, or does she backpedal 5 feet away for some reason? But I get that it's for cinematography, but it kind of just still kind of got to me. I was like, okay, what's going on here? But regardless, at the end of the scene, Rey picks up the lightsaber, and this is, again, speaking, I think, more to the audience. That's showing the thing, like, yes, Luke is done with this. Now Rey is the lightsaber bearer. Deal with it. So I think this was an attempt in this film, in general, to kind of go to more what, like, the Star Trek universe is. And I think with the Star Trek universe, even though it is expansive, I think the different installments are dealt with as individual creatures. I mean, sometimes they'll compare something that happened in Deep Space Nine to Voyager, or something that happened in the Next Generation to the original series. But those have their captains, have their crews, have their own kind of identities that I think are treated in a separate way. But this is in no small part due to the creative direction of George Lucas and others in control of Star Wars, so it's not unwarranted. But I think Disney has new stewards. Disney as the new stewards of Star Wars may be looking to creating more separation in the franchise, at least the way the franchise is dealt with and judged and treated. So I like the pacing of the film from the opening and the way characters were reintroduced and new characters were brought in. And there was a lot of setups that had pretty good payoffs later on. For example, when Snoke is being confronted by Kylo Ren in the next scene in his throne room, the Red Guard kind of springs into attention. And at this moment I thought, okay, I really hope they do get to fight eventually. And they did, and it was glorious. Another gripe here, though, I can chalk up to cinematography is they must have been aware of how outmatched Kylo was by Snoke. They must know the power levels here. And as far away as they were from Snoke, if Kylo actually had the ability to harm Snoke, wouldn't he have already done that before they could even get close to him? But as I said, this was for cinematography and introducing the weaponry that they had, which was pretty cool. So Snoke says to Kylo in this scene that you are no Vader. And again, this is, I think, the creators using the character as surrogates for the fans, where they're saying Kylo Ren should be viewed as a standalone villain. And again, this is creative choices that they decided. They decided to go with a design that's similar to Darth Vader, but in this film, he actually ends up taking this off and breaking it away, which is, I think, why I'm saying that I see this more, where this film may be, okay, now we're breaking away from this older Star Wars and going into something new. So a little sidebar about food here. There was a humorous scene with this lactating creature on the side of a cliff. And some time back, I had stopped drinking milk, as even when it's not from cows that are kept pregnant at least once a year and then have their calves removed and then end up being hormonally imbalanced, the milk itself is intended to turn baby cows in quite a short while into a massive bovine creature. So human babies in general should drink breast milk from the first 6 months. I mean, it's advised that first 6 months, only breast milk. And it's enough in milk to sustain the growth of a child. It's a meal. So I suggest people try taking some time off of milk, and I'd consider going off cheese as well for the lactose, but it's cheese, and I think something that happens in the lactose process during cheese, I'm making excuses for cheese because I love cheese. So for the cooks out there, also try using ghee to cook, which is butter with all the milk solids removed, and avoiding lactose kind of reduces bloating in your body. And I think you should try it out. It might make you feel better. But back to the cliffs. The look the lactating creature gives Leia after Luke milks it is hilarious. I actually had laugh out loud. I was laughing, chuckling out loud at that time. And a similar thing happens later with the little big-eyed birds looking up at Chewbacca after he had roasted one of their kind. So after several of these little penguin bird creatures looked at him, he was unable to actually eat the bird carcass. And I had seen an earlier review saying that these little creatures were thrown in just as cutesy annoyances to sell toys, and they will sell toys, but they didn't annoy me. So small touches like how they nested into the Millennium Falcon made me think of something that occurs during travel, you know. This is another sidebar within a sidebar, I guess. But what would a sidebar within a sidebar? This is like a side little nook within the sidebar. So one thing I kind of wonder is if you're like lying down in the grass somewhere and an ant climbs on you, then you get in a car and you drive across town and the ant drops off finding itself like 40 miles away from its anthill. What does it do in that situation? Or let's say there's an insect on the plane and they survive the trip and then they get off in another location. Let's say it's like a fly or something, or maybe some kind of colony, kind of nesting animal. Do they join another colony or another nest? I don't know. So, end of that. So, this ability of animals to look a certain way, I think, has played a large part in the changing diets of some people or the selective diets of some people in the West. It's a lot easier to anthropomorphize animals rather than plants. And this effect is taken much further later on in the film when they had these horse creatures in the wealthy gambling town that had distinctly simian facial structure. And I think that kind of makes it easier for the viewer or the person to kind of see themselves or feel for the creature. So this makes me wonder, if plants had eyes and mouths and noses that we could easily identify, how many vegans and vegetarians would just be omnivores? Well, who knows, and since they don't, it's possibly a moot point. So now back into the film. Luke is rather reticent to train Rey, who states that she was sent with hope, and I think this is more talking to the audience, as A New Hope was a title later tagged on to the original Star Wars film, and that original film, and the first of this series, this trilogy, The Force Awakens, had very similar storylines. And this could be more, again, of the creator saying, yes, it was intended to be similar in the storylines. We watched those first films too. We know that millions of new people have not seen those first films and would not mind getting them in as a new audience. So they're using a proven formula. But now this is a new hope. This is a new direction. So now on to a scene with gender violence. Now it's regrettable in the current year to see this sort of abuse of power. It's a horrible thing. And in a film that kids are supposed to watch. So we still have a long way to go in gender equality. Oh wait, it was an older and more powerful Leia slapping a younger Poe for overestimating his abilities, so never mind that. This film would likely score well with the Bechdel test, which is with female characters who are spoken to or in positions of power or who speak without them being spoken to first, etc., and a lot of minority characters. So I think on that aspect, the social justice warrior type crowd is going to be very pleased with this. As for the don't hit ladies social convention of the past, present, and future, I imagine it is also very true in galaxies far, far away. So the scene is partially mirrored later on when Luke and Rey clash after he considers she has overstepped due to her youthful overestimation or underestimation of the threats. And Rey did initiate the actual physical violence in that situation, which is actually a lot more common than people know. I think a lot more common than is shared, that females often initiate. I think it's like something like 40 to 45%. They actually initiate the physical violence when it comes to gendered violence, domestic violence situations. So as we're on the topic of emotional violence or emotions leading to violence, let's get back to Kylo Ren. And we find him just spurging out, just losing it and smashing his mask onto the side of this elevator. So I think this works in several ways. First, it distances him from Darth Vader, the look of Darth Vader wearing the mask, being this stoic character, to this more emotional character. And it's also a good way to have his face shown. This is a task that directors and creatives must deal with when they have great costume design, but they also know the faces of the actors who are actually going to sell a lot of tickets. And also with Adam Driver, who plays Kylo Ren, he does, I think, a really good job of emoting. And this is just something that actors do. I think a lot of it is in their eyes, in their faces, and their emotions they give off this way. So instead of finding creative ways to find his helmet taken off here and there, this was a good way to just have it off and be done with it. He then storms off into space with a new resolve, and was I the only one who thought that he was actually going to kill Leia in this battle? I thought he was going to do it, and then was going to complete his synthesizing. Anyway, so what was the Force power with Leia? I get that she's a Skywalker, but had it been introduced in the extended creative universe of Star Wars? And first I thought it may have just been somebody else pulling her in, or I don't know if they have tractor beam technology in this film, or was that just in Spaceballs? I thought it also might just be a CG scene added as an homage to the now late Carrie Fisher, but she actually makes it to the end of the film, so I'm interested to see how it's going to be handled in the upcoming installments. So, Grand Moff Tarkin was a CG construct in the Star Wars film Rogue One and was roundly mocked by many, but I am old enough to remember being captivated by claymation, stop motion, and pixelation in films. I look back to those films now and find it hard to imagine ever seeing it as fluidly as I once did. It's a thing that I try to remind myself before I criticize CG in films is to realize that most of the people, the average moviegoer, probably does not have the same amount of access or time spent with cutting edge computer graphics as I do, let alone people who actually spend more time with these things. So that uncanny valley effect is much deeper for most people. I think a good comparison would be if you're male and think about those pictures you see of women without makeup, or this new make app that removes the makeup from photos of people, and men see them, they're like, oh my, like that's a big change. But females who are familiar with makeup usually see those and say, okay, yeah, we know this is a change that's to be expected. We know how someone looks with makeup. We know how they look without it. It's understandable. Well, that's if they're not complaining about the patriarchy or more oppression and things like that from this app. But now that we're on gender, so more horrible gender stereotypes. Here we have R2D2 showing Luke the hologram of Leia. And this is the family ties and the damseling of females. No, stop that. This is the current year. We won't be having that. No, but anyway, it's actually a really good callback to the old Star Wars and rekindling the old feelings and memories because they have been doing a lot of that. Like, oh, this old stuff is old. Let it go. This is a good way of kind of saying this old stuff is actually kind of good too. So this is also why the comparisons in the Star Wars universe are as close as they are. So they're still carrying that over. You can't just let that go completely. I think it's part of the DNA of what Star Wars is. And more so, this is a general human condition. I think this is a general animal condition. If there's a situation where there's males and females, I think in general, males do things for females. So it's a good nod to that reality of it. When we go back to the Rebel fleet, we see that they are being chased by the First Order, and Finn, the character of Finn that used to be with the First Order, switched over to the Rebels. This is played by John Boyega. He's still his flustered self and kind of running around, spazzing out, trying to escape the situation. But he ends up together with Rose Tico, who, as I mentioned before, is the sister of the character that died in the bomber in the initial scene in the film, in the starting scene of the film, and they're kind of coupled together to have their own storyline in this film. So now I'm going to discuss the new treatments of the Force. So there's this new link between Kylo and Rey, which could have just been some overpowering of the new leads to upstage the previous ones. And this is a common trope. I appreciated how it was introduced as the film went on and built upon. They can sense each other and talk to each other, and then Rey shot that wall, possibly thinking that Kylo was right outside them, which kind of sets up that there's actually a physical presence to this. They didn't just Mary Sue this and have this be a Rey-specific power, but they have a situation where Kylo can tap into this too. And is it just them seeing each other? Not quite. Because right after Rey shot that wall and went outside to check if he was there, Luke ends up coming out of his hut and Kylo seems to sense him, if not directly see him. It also shows that there's something trance-like about that, because when Luke comes out and Rey breaks that link, now you see that there are these caretakers kind of scurrying around the island worried about what happened with a hole in this building. So this tells us more about the link that can change one's perception. And in a subsequent link, it's raining where Rey is, and then it's mirrored by raining sparks where Kylo is, and it ends up with water on Kylo's glove. So I thought this was far too much moisture to just be tears that Kylo was crying, even though Kylo does cry a lot. He's very emotional. But this sets up another ability of this link, which may not be directly transportation, but some kind of transubstantiation of one's surroundings, or maybe sharing each other's surroundings, kind of coming to a similar location. So next, the ability of physical touch is set up when Kylo is sitting across from Rey right before Luke comes into the hut and blows the hut down before the aforementioned fight between the old and new leads. So Rey and Luke have this fight, and at this point we're already in a situation where the Rebel force is being chased down by Snoke and his First Order forces. Finn and Rose Tico are on this gambling Vegas planet place where they're trying to get this hacker so hacker can destroy the tracking device that the First Order has. So there's this sense of danger and time running down, and you get to the point where Rey has kind of is disillusioned. She's saying, "Luke, you're not helping me. You're not going to do this. So I'm going to go out and do this myself. I have to save my friends. I have to save the rebels. If you're not going to help me, I'm going to find my own way." And in this situation, Kylo reaches out to Rey, and she decides to go along with Kylo. And when Kylo finally takes Rey to the throne room to face Snoke, we're told through some exposition that Snoke was the one that initiated this connection between Kylo and Rey. This continues to set up how powerful that Kylo actually is. Then Kylo and Rey actually confront Snoke, and he seems to handle them without needing to get up from his seat, displaying more frightful power levels and continuing my "why are those red guard even there" questions. So when Snoke finally does meet his end, I'm glad that the Red Guard didn't do that whole, "oh, you beat our leader, now you win, we're just going to give up and stop fighting" that does happen in some situations. So there was a glorious fight scene. I really enjoyed this fight scene. Really, really enjoyed it. It played a big part in the design choices of this Abyss character that's been going on the screen right now. And I liked how they could use the Force to move and suspend the lightsabers around, but the lightsabers must be in their hand to be activated. And I'm guessing it's something to do with the body having to be the conduit of the Force into the device. And the guards, I assume, could have been some of the trainees that fled from Luke's training camp with Kylo, but their weapons are more examples of the tech in this extended universe. Because if you have such a universe, you've had Jedis and people with lightsabers existing for this long. There had to be some actual technological countermeasures to having lightsabers. And if not, lightsabers were just, I mean, even with these countermeasures, lightsabers are still kind of cheat weapons. But yeah, it makes sense that they had these, because how else would they have eradicated all the Jedi? I know they have dreadnoughts so they could just bomb the Jedi bases from outside of from orbit, but there's also ways of coming in on hand-to-hand combat and countering it. Then we are given more character building here between the interactions between Rey and Kylo. Will Rey turn to the light, or will Kylo, turn to the light? Nope, he embraces the suck and says, "Let's destroy it all together. Let's just destroy all the bad guys, destroy all the good guys. Let's just be the leaders." So will our heroine Rey turn out to really be the Mary Sue daughter of Mark and Mei Sue? Nope, she turns out to just be some started from the bottom, now she here character, and Kylo could have lied. Her parents could be alive and well somewhere, but there's also no reason to think that he was lying about this. She probably is just some random. Which I think actually plays in more to the fans and people like, yeah, you could just be a random and then you could be with the Force. Another interesting part of this film was the time. How long do you think the film was actually in? I don't think they actually state anything directly, but they mention some times and things like this. But when you're talking about traveling at near to light speed or faster than light speeds, you have to deal with time dilation. So the film could technically have been in 72 hours or less. I think for certain the storyline with the rebels themselves, they were dealing with something in about 3 days. Now, though Rey arrived at that planet where Luke was at the start of the film, end of last film, she did have the Millennium Falcon, so she could have traveled back to them in faster than light speed and gotten there within those 72 hours of what was happening in the actual film. But yeah, I think the only actual times that were mentioned were the things that were happening with the Rebel Force. They were saying, okay, we have 9 hours until our fuel is going to run out, or something like that. So at this point in the film, we have everybody kind of converging back to the Rebel situation, what started the film. You have Finn and Rose on the Vegas land place. They failed at that mission, but were aided by a swindler, played pretty well by Benicio del Toro. And he then goes on to swindle them later on, and didn't see that coming, even though I kind of should have. The guy was just really shifty to begin with, but he also does mention that he likes a winning team, and at this time, the rebels very much looked like they were losing at that moment. The diversionary tactic was seen through, and the transports that were trying to escape to a nearby planet were being picked off. So it wasn't looking good for the rebels, until this happened. A lightspeed kamikaze attack. I repeat, light speed kamikaze attack. Now, this scene was amazing. I think just that scene alone was worth the $3.50 I paid for it. But I really like how they visually handle it. I still think it could have been done remotely, but this gives Vice Admiral Holdo some memorable death and some reason to have stayed on the ship. Also, anyway, it's a light speed kamikaze attack. I was I'm thoroughly pleased that I got to see that. I mean, when they were setting it up, I was like, is she going to do a light speed kamikaze attack? She's going to do a light speed kamikaze attack. She's doing a light speed kamikaze attack. Oh my god, that was a light speed kamikaze attack. That light speed kamikaze attack was awesome. Still think it was awesome. What did you guys think about it? So Snoke's super dreadnought was crumbling after said lightspeed kamikaze attack, and Finn and Rose's escape after the battle with Captain Phasma, who again, as I mentioned before, some characters, when it's like a lead character, when it's a known actor, actress, they want to get the face off so they can actually see the character and sell more tickets. And I like how they didn't do that with Captain Phasma. She's played by the person who plays Brienne, Lady Brienne from what's it called, Game of Thrones. So it's a known actress. I think she would have gotten some people in the seats, but people know she's there, and they didn't have a thing where they just take her mask off. But they could have just shown her to be this Betsy badass, unstoppable juggernaut character, but instead was rather competent. I mean, she's a well trained soldier. So she was competent, but ended up losing due to a combination of general chaos going on in that landing bay place they were in, and battling people who were fighting for their lives, who were they weren't exactly lacking skills. I mean, they were in the rebel army. As I said, Finn was in the First Order, so he had some training. I think he was a janitor or something before, but he had some training in the First Order, and then extra training as a rebel. Rose Tico herself might have had this basic training. They're also fighting for their life. And I doubt she's dead, as in these sort of films, unless you actually see an actual body or two parts of a body as it's common in Star Wars, I don't believe the actual death has occurred. So now the final arc. The rebels made it to the planetary base. They're ensconced in there. Rey's on her way after, as I said, Luke said she could train her, but he couldn't help her, and then she decided to leave, go help. She met up with Kylo, and then Kylo had that whole situation, let's destroy everything. She battled Kylo and said, no, I'm leaving, I'm going to go help the rebels. Kylo, as expected, did not take this well. He was rather pissed. He was taking command of the First Order, what's left of the First Order. He's landed some troops onto the planet and are bearing down on the rebel forces on the rebel base. He's modified this little cannon that's going to knock down the door, and then he has these guerrilla AT&T walkers and other forces poised to just kill all the rats in their hole. When one of the rebels mentions that there's salt on the ground right outside the rebel base, I thought maybe this is like a seabed and there's going to be like some mountainous tidal waves come rushing in like an Interstellar and wash off the First Order people, but that never happened. So I don't know why that was mentioned. Maybe this was part of the extended universe, an Easter egg for people, and a lot of scenes and characters I realize are kind of Easter eggs, where if you are more aware of Star Wars universe, you'd be like, oh, that's so-and-so from here. Oh, that's such and such location from that. But I don't get why they mentioned that. If you guys know, let me know. So back to the film. Though Luke had refused to help, I did expect him to have a change of heart, and I did remember that one scene where Rey looked into the water and saw an X-Wing, and I thought, okay, if it's space-proof, does that mean it's going to be waterproof? Are we going to see Luke fly in on his X-Wing and save the day? And I should have began to suspect something as soon as he showed up without actually having the X-Wing, even though X-Wings don't have light speed capabilities. I think in the original trilogy or something, it may have been used where it had some long-haul flights, it had some kind of attachment, some parachute-type modification that could give it more energy for further flights. I don't know, but would he have that technology on this planet with him? I don't know. So regardless, Luke is on the planet. He's there to save the rebels, and this was a great reveal. Instead of just going with yet another death by bisection by lightsaber, which I thought was what was going to happen, it turns out that this is a projection of Luke. Luke is still on the island, and he just projects his physical self, or his being, or his essence, to the planet. So this new Force ability had been discussed. As I previously mentioned, it was set up pretty well. Kylo had shown the ability to project some kind of physical presence into that hut and have Rey actually physically touch his hand before Luke comes in and knocks it down and says, okay, Rey, you are underestimating what you're dealing with. You are dealing with some really dark juju here. Dark juju? Okay, I don't know if there's juju in this. Dark Jedi. Dark Jed. So on that random island that didn't turn out to be that random, since it had that shrine to the Jedi Masters with all the Jedi text and stuff, and also had this dark hole to the dark side. It's literally just like a hole. It's like the back end of the Force. So he had investigated that, so he could have actually tapped into these further abilities of the Force. Well, Luke having this projection, first of all, it sets his power level up on that of Snoke, or at least higher than that of Snoke, because his projection was pretty convincing. I mean, the First Order sensors could actually detect it like it was a human and then fire at him. When they fired at him, that barrage from all these weapons that they have from their guerrilla walkers and from the guns and everything in the ships that they had there, he survives that. You know, I was thinking, was that some kind of shield? No, it was a projection. All the things were just going through him. And before the scene, he was actually able to sit there and talk to Leia and actually hand her a trinket that was actually physically still there in her hand. It actually lasted until even after his projection was gone. But that shows the level of projection that he could have here. He could actually project elements and items and things like that, create constructs of things. Then after surviving the munitions barrage, he could actually engage in a lightsaber battle with Kylo. And I know Kylo's mind wasn't really completely stable at this point, but it was still convincing enough for him to think the person was actually there. In hindsight, when he actually first showed up in the bunker, he seemed younger and more refreshed than he did on the island. So I could have kind of told, like, okay, maybe that wasn't necessarily him. There was also that one smile-worthy scene with Yoda when they're burning the ancient Jedi texts. It made me kind of think of what is the projection? How do they choose what age or appearance they have when they project themselves through the Force? Why don't they come back as teenagers or their eldest self right before they died? Like, how do they choose their age? Anyway, after Luke does this, he kind of goes back. They show him back on the island on this little meditation platform of his, and he kind of just becomes one of the Force. He kind of just disapparates or just disappears. His clothes kind of fall to the ground or fall to the platform, and I like how they handled Luke's departure from the series. I don't know how you guys think about it, but I really liked it, and he kind of becomes one with the Force, and maybe this is why Snoke didn't use that power as much as Luke did, or to this extent, or just project himself to where Rey was and then end up killing Rey or something, because this is the high cost that takes from actually using this kind of power. So we're here at the end of the film, and the rebels end up escaping through this tunnel, and the door gets melted down despite all the efforts of the people trying to stop them, of Rey and things like that. The door gets melted down. It looks like the First Order is going to take out all the rebels. But then thanks to the second coolest visual in this film, after the lightspeed kamikaze attack, which is a tough thing to actually defeat, the Crystal Foxes. They realize that the Crystal Foxes are missing, these little creatures, and when they follow them to the back of the cave, they find an exit. They get to the main exit, there's some boulders in the way, and Rey shows up and shows her powers continuing to awaken. She lifts these boulders up. Finn and Rey finally reunite, and then they have, I think, one or two last scenes on the Millennium Falcon as they wind everything down. All in all, a pretty good film. Also, kind of interesting that they had the whole Finn and Rey thing at the start. I mean, in the previous film, people were wondering, are they going to be together? And then they have this thing where they go the entirety of the film without seeing each other, even though part of the reason that Finn was doing all he was doing was to kind of save Rey, and part of why Rey was doing what she was doing was to save the rebels. So they had each other in mind. And they also have a scene where she's kind of looking over at Finn and Rose Tico, so I think that might be more of their romantic relationship. And they may have Rey to be more of maybe something with Kylo, or have her just be a standalone character that doesn't necessarily have a romantic storyline going with her. Although, now that I think about it, it's kind of what happened with Luke, right? He kind of had that weird thing going on with Leia before, and then Leia ended up coupling up with Han Solo, so this might not be that new of a thing. But anyway, now on to some points about the film. So first, thanks for listening to this review till here. I'm just going to wind it down, as I said, with a few different points. So, the Fifis. The initial Luke and Rey training where he says, reach out with your feelings. They could have gone with that woo type of spirituality thing, but they added levity to that scene. I found it to be a good update on the Star Wars mythos, and I preferred it to the midi-chlorians or whatever kind of explanation they had for the Force before. What do you guys think? Next, bow staff is the best weapon. A bow staff in general is just a stick. They're handy, a makeshift one can be made more often than other weapons. You snap off a broomstick or a branch and a rod and anything, and you're in the game. Worth repeating again, the Red Guard, awesome. Love the different weapons they had. Love that fight choreography. Pretty cool scene. Next is more resistance throughout the film. Resistance happens, and in a recent video I talked about people who have resistance to resistance, or resisting the resistance to resist, because of what sort of resistance actually happens. You know, there are things that are definitely worth resisting. There was also resistance to the abolition of slavery. And many in these self-styled resistance to Trump movements that are going on, or just political resistance movements right now, will think that this film was a nod to them. Like, oh yeah, we see you out there, we support you. And again, this is in no small part due to the choices made by the creative team and outright declarations made by some involved who said, yes, this is similar, this is kind of like the resistance that's going on against Trump. But I don't think this film is necessarily anti-Trump or anything, that was the intention. But there's just a general social climate where things like the aspects in this film that kind of glorify resistance and the actual resistance movements in society are happening from the same kind of social reasons. Different things happen for the same reasons. Now, again, a lot of people who are in support of Trump, or at least do not actively oppose him, will see this film and they'll see many parts that are like, okay, this is not an anti-Trump film. I mean, some people might be saying like, ooh, resistance, but they don't see that. They find it enough as just an entertaining film. So anyway, rebels themselves have always been rebel bastards, and they even say that in the film. It's just that under Obama, there weren't so many people LARPing as rebels, and by LARPing I mean live action role-playing. There were people who were against what Obama was doing, who weren't positive for it, but they weren't out in the streets anywhere close to the numbers that they are now. They weren't out and all this kind of resistance and what that kind of stuff. They weren't doing that. They were in home. They had jobs. They had other things. Oh, no, not jobs. The jobs thing is kind of a low blow. But they had other things to do. They were resisting in different ways that weren't as public, as virtue signaling as I think the current resistance movements have. So I definitely have much resistance to believing in the resistance of a lot of the people who are currently resisting. Next is the Myriad duplicates imagery. So it's another commendable scene that I did mention in the review discussion rant view above, when Rey actually dives into that dark portal that I mentioned, that backside of the dark side. And we're shown this scene culminating in her seeing numerous reflections of herself, duplicates of herself. And it kind of made me think of the darkness in the abyss. That it's not some alien creature that exists in the abyss, but it's ourselves. I thought that was a cool scene. And there's a project that I had in mind, that same project where this abyss character is from, that evoked some similar imagery in me when there's a transition between one form of reality into another form of reality, one existence, one reality tunnel to another reality tunnel. So more on that later, but I also liked how they had this stuttered action on the reflections. It was like this direct, but it's like one arm would come up, then a slight second later the next one, and it was kind of like a wave kind of motion kind of thing. And also continued the film's theme of reflection and duplication. Next is She Said, He Said. I like the disparity between the way Kylo and Luke recollected the confrontation that ended in their teacher-student relationship breaking up. I'm referring to Luke's complete and honest recollection versus his abridged saving face one. It shows that how even if people are being completely honest about something they both experienced, they can have different impressions of what occurred. Kylo was correct in that Luke actually did want to kill him for at least a moment. He did leave out, though, his connection to the dark side that he had previous to this. Even if he was unaware that Luke had probed his mind and actually seen that, I think Kylo himself knew that he had some connection to the dark side. Next is Yoda the MVJ, the most valuable Jedi. So back to that scene that I mentioned in passing where Yoda is talking to Luke as they watch the Jedi shrine burn. He says about the students that masters are what they grow beyond. So this applies within the story, and also I think speaking to the audience, saying that these characters in Yoda, Luke, are what the new character is actually going to grow beyond. Last point, kill yourself. So in this last scene, in that last arc, there's a part where Finn is in the speeder and he's attempting a heroic suicidal attack in the end where he's like, I'm going to fly my ship into this cannon as it's firing at the gate. And Rose Tico ends up saving her. I was also thinking they could have made her a Latina actress and then named her something like Rose Taco or something like that. But anyway, if she hadn't saved him here and he died here, I would have been passable with it. I'd have been like, yeah, okay, no problem. I mean, Luke dies, Snoke dies, and I think those were the only characters from the last film that died, so it's not that much actual attrition in the cast. So now we're at the end, and thanks for listening to this. The film was 150 minutes. You've listened to over 45 minutes of this so far, so thanks again. So I still didn't listen to any reviews of the film or read any reviews, and I saw a few headlines and comments, and some saying that it underwhelmed in China. Some people were outright saying that Star Wars is dead. But as I mentioned, I actually found it to be positive that it made an attempt to distance itself from the previous Star Wars films. How effective that's going to be, I think time will tell. So I would have found this film to be entertaining, even if it did have Star Wars attached to it. And not just because of the lightspeed kamikaze attack, but lightspeed kamikaze attacks do not hurt. If you have a film and you can shoehorn in a lightspeed kamikaze attack, do it and it'll probably be a plus in my book. I did one of these rant review things for the Justice League film, and I remember watching that film. It was a disjointed film, and that was, I think, part of the nature of how it was made, with different creators involved in it, different producers. So there was this one scene where you meet this family sitting at this dinner table in this chaotic scene, and I'm wondering, why are you just meeting them at this location? It just seemed out of place, it seemed disjointed, it seemed forced. You compare that to this one scene in the film where they're talking to Max Kanata, who's this little yellowish techie character, kind of Asian looking, and the name is really close to Katana, but it was voiced by Lupita Nyong'o. But anyway, you come to the scene, and she's involved in a scene where there's a battle going on in the background. She's kind of ducking and weaving, hiding behind something, talking to them, saying there's this battle between the unions, some unions in the location she's in. Now, this is a rather throwaway character. It's a throwaway scene, I mean, but it's an engaging scene. It makes me wonder, like, oh, what's happening in this scene? And then I'm thinking, oh, wait, this could probably be a scene that's in one of the extended universe things. It could be something that maybe is going to be included in the video game Battlefront, where you can actually be at that location. But yeah, it was just these little touches, and it was just a well put together film. I've mentioned this in previous videos, especially one where I was touching on Disney's recent acquisition of most of 20th Century Fox's creative entertainment division. I could see a future where these large mega studios handle huge tentpole films like this, possibly releasing one a quarter, if not less. Like, if they have several IPs, they'd have one Star Wars in one quarter, then one X-Men universe, one Marvel-related universe, one DC, Big Three, talking about Superman, Wonder Woman, Batman, then one from the non-DC Big Three, the extended universe, and that sort of well-known IP where you can have side characters and stories and threads licensed off to smaller independent studios and creators, or straight to YouTube content, straight to Netflix content, and you may have ways to provide the platform for distribution where they can profit from any successful ones and maintain some control on the quality and the content. And I think Marvel already has released something similar to this. I saw this being mentioned where they had some kind of creator studio where you can actually use their characters in a certain way. But I've had this cloud creation idea in mind that I'll share with you guys soon. I've seen several other people mention it, as I said, this Marvel thing. And one group in particular, just three guys, approached me with some idea that they have, and I might do some work with them. But I've had this idea of crossover ideas of taking characters from one place, putting them into a location in somewhere else, taking storylines from somewhere else and matching them together. And you've seen some success with things like this, like the video game series Kingdom Hearts. This series takes Squaresoft characters and locations and storylines and mashes them together with characters from the Disney universe. My idea is Carbon. That's the name of that universe. That's the name of that creative universe. And I'll have a situation where I have a main storyline going in, but there's just going to be tons of material, or lots of material that people can take in. They can borrow characters. They can take the exact storyline that I'm working with and completely change what they want. They can add completely brand new things. But the way I'm going to try and create this, set up some kind of system where each storyline, each reality tunnel can exist on its own, and then people can find ways to bridge and connect these things together, or have things completely unrelated just with the same characters. Just like with the example with Abyss Nuit, who is a gravity elemental in the Carbon universe in my current storyline. in this triptych that I'm doing with the Sith thing, it could be involved in the Star Wars universe, or you could just be completely nothing to do with anything and just have this single standalone thing where someone can use just to have an interesting drawing. So that's it for now. As I said, thanks for watching this. Like, share, and subscribe. There's going to be links below to the merchandise store. You'll be able to buy this illustration and a lot of other material on different forms of merchandise if you go there. This illustration will be up as long as nobody takes it down for some kind of copyright strike. When I did the Thor rant review, I posted up the Thor does and the illustrations that I had for that, and that got a copyright strike from the store that I had with it from Marvel saying Avengers creative intellectual property, whatever. That's one thing I'm going to do with the Carbon universe that I'm going to have. I want to find a way where you can have as open an IP as possible, where you have some control over it, where it's still profitable for me to continue doing this, yet I have this material being completely open to, as open as possible for anybody else to use it, both for commercial and personal use. But anyway, hopefully I'll have more on that soon. Let me know if you guys have thought of ideas like that, if you guys are interested in that. Let me know if you guys like these kind of rants reviews. I could probably be doing one of these long form things once a month. Suggest any films that you would like in this form. And that's it for now. Please like, share, and subscribe. Merchandise store. Goodbye.